Can this standoff with Russia be resolved diplomatically? Pardon me. With me now, former State Department official Christian Whiton. Christian, great to see you to get some insight on this topic. As Rich reported there, the call is underway as we speak. Putin did request the call, but we don't necessarily know what he wants to talk about. What do you think that message is that he wants to send the president?
My guess is that he's trying to soften up Biden a little bit, trying to lay out an agenda and make it seem reasonable. What Russia wants from talks is an agreement not to let Ukraine into NATO, also not to let Georgia into NATO. There's been an increasing level of talk of yet again extending NATO closer to Russia's borders. So my guess is that that is probably at the top of the discussion. Of course, President Biden, on the other hand, would like to see this crisis go the same way that one went earlier this year, where Russia increased the number of forces on Ukraine's border, caused a bit of a stir, and then decreased those forces as the time went by.
Talking about sanctions, if Putin does move forward, there are a couple of options there. Of course, a lot of people are saying what he needs to do, the president, that is, President Biden, is essentially cut Russia out of the banking system, the international banking system, add a military presence there, also reverse the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Your thoughts on if he would exercise any of these options?
He's backed himself into so much of a corner that if Putin actually did invade Ukraine, which again I think is very unlikely at the end of the day, Russia does not actually want a war. The United States doesn't want a war here, but Biden would be obliged, I think, at this point to do something. You mentioned the financial sanctions. It's the idea of kicking them out of SWIFT, which is the Belgian-based mechanism for conducting a lot of cross-border transactions. The flip side of that is if we make too many people angry, too many countries, by doing that, you could have Russia and China together and Iran start to create something separate from a U.S. dollar-dominated international financial system. And there's also the question here of whether the American people are really willing to see the United States go onto a war footing over Ukraine. After all, this is Ukraine. It's not France or Britain or Holland or some of the countries that are more of our traditional allies.
Understood. But as Kamala Harris said in that interview, you know, we are respecting Ukraine's sovereignty. And so I would just have to follow up and ask you, if he's not prepared to invade Ukraine, then why amass the troops? Why create the situation that we're looking at right now?
Well, Putin actually loves what's going on as far as having a moment of the sun, in the sun, if you will. Russia's this, a very significant, old, powerful country, but it's still, and it does have the world's fourth or fifth largest army, depending on how you count North Korea, but an economy just, I believe, 1/12 the size of Europe. Putin has played a relatively bad hand very well. He continues to put himself in the spotlight. He continues to put himself on an equal level as the United States and China, which are two countries with vastly larger economies and militaries, and he might get what he wants here, which is actually to either make Ukraine neutral or to make it just de facto a member of Russia's sphere of influence, along with Georgia, Belarus, all of these other countries in Russia's so-called near abroad.
Yeah, some have suggested that this is almost a situation where he's flexing his muscles for his ego, right? With respect to geopolitics and his standing and Russia's standing in the world. Christian, always great to see you, sir. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.